Whoa! They say you have about 30 seconds to catch an audience's attention. So there you go. Don't worry, we're gonna get to this in a second. But for now, hit him with the intro. Today, I am in the town of Newark, Ohio, standing in front of a nondescript 5-lane road in what might potentially be an active crime scene. Now, when you look at the backdrop behind me, you probably don't really think of this as a location that would have an archaeological site. And yet, what you will find here is one of the most important archaeological sites in the entirety of North America. It's a site of monumental scale and complexity, and a site that was a pilgrimage for indigenous peoples from the Gulf of Mexico to the Yellowstone caldera all the way up into what is today Canada. It was built more than 2,000 years ago and covers more than 4 square miles, and is a site that I see infrequently talked about in the world of modern pop archaeology. But despite this, I think it's a site that you will be fascinated by, because it illustrates the sheer level of technological advancement and cultural coordination of the ancient people of North America. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Milo Rossi, and today it is my great pleasure to welcome you to the Great Circle Earthworks. Today we are here with none other than Dr. Brad Lepper, who is, as I say, the guy to talk to about these sites.
My name is Brad Lepper, and I'm the Senior Archaeologist for the Ohio History Connections World Heritage Program. And I've been working at this site, the Newark Earthworks, for a big chunk of my professional career. I was hired by the Ohio History Connection in 1988 to be the curator and site archaeologist for the Newark Earthworks. And most of my research in the subsequent years has been focused here and on another Ohio History Connection site, the Serpent Mound. This has been my passion for the last 40 years or whatever.
Like I said, the guy. Brad, thank you so much for being here today.
My pleasure.
Let's explore the site.
Let's go.
So this is the entrance to the circle.
Yes, this is the only entrance. It's the grandest gateway in the ancient Hopewell world.
Wow, that is a huge entrance. Look at that.
And you have to try to imagine it, 2,000 years ago, that interior ditch would have been filled with water and there were no trees.
Really? Wow, we've just sort of actually entered the earthwork now. This thing is massive. I don't think I really got a perspective. I looked at it on satellite and on maps before coming here, but this is gigantic.
It's 1,200 feet in diameter. That's 4 American football fields.
Oh, wow, that is amazing. The Hopewell Ceremonial Earthworks at Newark, Ohio are really impressive. At one time, they covered more than 4 square miles, but because of the expansion of the town of Newark, much of them has been destroyed. This map, pictured on my left, illustrates the extent that these earthworks once had, all of which are part of the Newark Ceremonial Earthworks UNESCO World Heritage Site. 2 of the 8 protected earthworks are in Newark, Ohio, those being the Octagon Earthworks and the Great Circle Earthworks, where we will be shooting today. So even though these are 2 separate sites now, they were once part of the same large complex. So for the sake of this video, I want to talk about this site in the context that it once appeared, not just what's left of it. So why don't you come a little bit closer, and we'll talk about just how amazing this site once was. Wow, this is really nice, guys. I feel closer to you already. We should do this more often. I need like a little pointy thing. Do I have something that's pointy? That's a little bit too big, I think. It's a little dinky. I don't know how I feel about that. How about this? Knife sharpener. On guard. Bonk. I think a very important thing to note when talking about pretty much any ancient culture, we have no idea what the Hopewell actually called themselves. They could have referred to themselves as different things based on the village they were from, or their, lineage or something like that. The Hopewell Builders is a name that has been assigned to them. But for descended communities of the Hopewell Builders and the Hopewell culture, the term Hopewell is a little bit contentious. So we kind of want to avoid referring to them as things like the Hopewell people, because that wasn't really their name. I may have a little bit of a Freudian slip here and there and use that, and I want to kind of apologize in advance because it's kind of just the way that my vernacular worked. I wouldn't be shocked if in the future we see this name be changed or we see some sort of reform to the way that we refer to them as. So I just want to make that clear right now that I'm trying to be respectful to, you know, kind of the loaded history of assigning groups with names, especially when it's a, you know, a colonizing force assigning a group with name and not the descendants assigning it a name. So this may be something which is subject to change in the future, but I'm making this video right now, so who knows? This might be horribly outdated in 10 years.
So, what are we looking at here?
So this is based on a map published by the Smithsonian Institution in 1848, their very first publication, in fact. It's a survey done by Charles Whittlesey, Ephraim Squire, and Edwin Davis of the Newark earthworks before so much of it was destroyed. It's not a perfect map, but it's iconic.
First and foremost, this is an artist's interpretation. It was created by my wonderful partner, Zaboski. Thank you, honey. It looks beautiful. I love you. Now, because this is an artist's interpretation, things like these farm fields are not based on archaeological data. The Hopewell builders did have agriculture, and so we thought it was important to include a little bit of that here. And things like these tree lines are also not specific to any sort of actual archaeological data. They are simply there to sort of indicate a little bit of what the surroundings would have been like. So I just want to preface that. I know this isn't a big deal to most viewers, but my whole thing is, you know, talking about misinformation. So I don't want people to be like, did you know there was farms around literally everything? I have no idea if there was farms around literally everything, okay? It just looks really nice. Give me a break. You guys are also gonna have to forgive me if my voice sounds a little wonk in this video. I'm just getting over a cold. And so I figured it was the perfect time for me to stand in my 40-degree studio and recover from it by talking loudly and breathing in cold, damp air. I got pneumonia talking about the Great Circle Earthworks, not clickbait. Let's get cracking on this thing, shall we? The Ceremonial Earthworks at Newark consisted of a few major locations. In the northwest, we have Observatory Circle, which is connected through a narrow passageway to the Octagon. Over here to the east, we have one of the larger enclosures of the site known as the Cherry Valley Ellipse. To the southwest of that, we have Wright Square. And finally, the star of the show, the shooting location of today's video, the Great Circle herself. Sminky, 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 sminky. Boom! Costume change. And I'm not sick anymore. Look at how nice my voice is. La 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 la. Well, you're probably wondering, Milo, why are you looking a little bit different? And that's because I'm here to tell you something about that's called the octagon right there. The octagon is probably the most fascinating earthwork at the Newark site, with multiple angles of it calibrated to the 18.6-year cycle of the moon's progression across the sky. Okay, you're gonna be on this table now? That's cool. You wanna be in the video? That's a yes. Along with that, this site has actual sacred geometry. Like real sacred geometry. I know, it's crazy. And I was gonna include the sacred geometry and astronomical alignment part in this video, but the more I dug into it, the more I realized how insane it is that the Hopewell builders figured this stuff out. And the script just kept getting longer and longer, and I kept adding more and more into it, and I decided, you know what? This is so impressive, it kind of just deserves its own little video on its own. So after this one, I'm gonna do kind of a separate video just diving into the sacred geometry and astronomical alignments of this site. I think that in doing what we do here, it's so frequent to see examples of people making up sacred geometry or claiming that it's evidence of some lost master civilization from the Ice Age. So we can kind of fall into a habit of having a knee-jerk reaction when we hear the word sacred geometry to just say like, oh no, absolutely not, and just sort of write it off on principle. But I think it's equally important to give actual credence to sites like this where sacred geometry does exist, because it's not evidence that some lost civilization taught them, it's evidence that the Hopewell builders were really technologically advanced. So in order to give ample time and reverence to this unbelievable site, I'm going to be making a whole separate video talking about the sacred geometry and the astronomical alignments at Newark. And this one will stand as more of the site itself and a little bit about the Hopewell culture. So if you're interested in looking at what real sacred geometry and unbelievably complex astronomical calendars look like, stay tuned for that video. It'll probably be the next one after this. Another thing I forgot to mention in the first studio section of this video, the observatory mound and the octagon earthworks were both turned into a golf course. The Great Circle, the Octagon. Okay, Schminky, you have to go down. I'm pointing at things now. The only parts of this site that still exist are the Great Circle, the Observatory Circle, and the Octagon, and a tiny little sliver of Wright Square that exists in like the backyard of a welding fabrication workshop or something. The Great Circle still exists because in the 1800s it was turned into the county fairgrounds, and this complex still exists because it was turned into a training ground for the Ohio State Militia. But after it was done being used by the Ohio State Militia, it was turned into a country club, literally called the Mound Builder Country Club. I know, not great. But I am very happy to say that as of this January 2025, it has officially been given to the UNESCO World Heritage Site, meaning the country club and the the golf course on top of it will be dismantled, and it will be actually turned into the archaeological site and sacred site that it deserves to be. So that right there is a huge dub. Anyway, I wanted to just mention that because I thought it was kind of cool. Back to the video. The Great Circle is, as its name would imply, great in scale, not quality. Well, quality as well, but it's great, it's big, it's great big, you know? And despite how colossal it is standing on the inside, archaeologists aren't entirely sure what was actually in it.
It's hard to say, and we haven't done the sort of ground penetrating radar kinds of studies that would reveal that here. And when we have, like using magnetometry, we see this layer of the fairground.
Because in the late 1800s, settlers used this giant circle as a fairground. And so the entire surface of it is littered in thousands of metal nails, making any sort of signature from anything else metal at the site completely invisible. Hey, you know, at least it still exists, which is more than I can say for almost everything else here. At the very center of this earthwork is a small feature known as Eagle Mound. It was named because it vaguely is winged, like an eagle would be. While indigenous groups in this part of the world did build effigy mounds, as they're called, mounds that are made to look like an animal, archaeologists don't have enough reason to believe that this was actually made to look like an eagle and think that it was kind of just conjecture based on its shape afterwards. Now, there has actually been some excavation done at Eagle Mound, and at its center, archaeologists have found post holes, evidence that there was once a longhouse at the center. Archaeologists have also found the remains of the floor of this longhouse, which is made out of alternating layers of differently colored clays and soils. This is one of many examples of the Hopewell builders using different colored earth in their constructions. For example, the Great Circle itself was once colored with different types of soil, with the exterior part of the enclosure coated in a darker soil, and the interior being coated in a lighter, almost yellow type of soil. But probably most interestingly is that at the center of the Great Circle at Eagle Mound, archaeologists have found the remains of charred human bones. Okay, quick little clarification about the charred remains found at the Eagle Mound. The charred human bones were allegedly found by an antiquarian in like the late early 1900s, and further excavation done in the 1920s didn't find any charred human bones. So the credibility for this is sort of so-so. Contextually for the site, it's not out of the question, because there were charred human remains found at the Cherry Valley Ellipse, but I just wanted to put that out there so you know that there's a little bit of further research to be done at this site in order to actually confirm that that's truly what was found here. There's evidence to support that this site was once used for rites and rituals associated with preparing the dead for burial. So this would have been, was it flowing water through here, or was it kind of like a moat?
Yes, it was like a moat, except it's on the inside of the walls.
Interesting.
Rather than outside.
Is there any theory as to why there was a, moat on the inside of the wall?
There's notions. We're talking to our indigenous partners. There's some tribes that think bodies of water can't be crossed by spirits of the dead.
Oh, I see.
So it may be that human remains were being processed for burial out here, then to be taken through ceremonial processions to the burial mounds a mile that way.
Huh.
And the water boundary would have kept the spirits here and from wandering off and possibly causing harm in the community or just getting lost.
But probably the most interesting, in my opinion, features of the site is this, the Cherry Valley Ellipse. The Cherry Valley Ellipse was absolutely massive, and it was an enormous burial enclosure. At the center of it were, I think 11 mounds were counted there. Enormous, huge burial mounds. Interring the dead in mounds was customary for a lot of different cultures in this part of the world at this time. And it's sort of believed that this side of the complex was associated with death rituals and preparing the dead for burial. As we talked about earlier, archaeologists have found the remains of charred human bones at the Great Circle. Charred human bones were also found at the Cherry Valley Ellipse, meaning that this is likely a place where the dead were prepared and then finally laid to rest in the Ellipse, making this essentially a massive graveyard. I got some bad news about the Cherry Valley Ellipse. You see, when settlers first came to this site, Cherry Valley Ellipse was pretty much the first thing to go. It all started in the 1830s when the Ohio Canal came through the area and went directly through one of the burial mounds. Inside it, workers reported finding, as you won't be too surprised, human skeletons. Not only human skeletons, but skeletons covered in intricately cut pieces of mica, a sheet-like mineral that originated hundreds of miles away from here and was brought to this site. Workers excavating here estimated that they pulled 10 bushels of this intricately cut mica out of this site. Today, none of it exists. But it gets worse. You see, shortly after the canal was constructed, America was still on its manifest destiny grind, and was laying track. As misfortune would have it, when the railroad came through town, it went directly through the middle of this ancient cemetery. Mounds were leveled and excavated to make way for the rail grade that came through. And I am horrified to say, were torn down and leveled, and the material used as slag to fill in low places so that the railroad could pass over it. If that isn't one of the best analogies for the colonization of North America, then I don't know what is. Even by the time that Squire and Davis made their map, most of the Cherry Valley Ellipse was completely destroyed, with one of the last mounds at the site leveled when a mill was built on top of it. And with that, a sacred cemetery at one of the most important sites in the Hopewell world was turned into a wasteland, an industrial complex, with God knows how many thousands of individuals and tens of thousands of artifacts lost to time. Because so much of the destruction of this site happened so quickly and with no archaeologists to intervene with it, there have been almost no artifacts recovered from this entire site, except for one. See, that mill I told you about earlier eventually had to be torn down. Bless up. And when that happened, workers started excavating to build a basement for the next building. It was here that they stumbled upon a grave that happened to survive the destruction of everything around it. And when they dug into it, they found not only human remains, but a carved effigy of a person wearing a bear skin. This figurine has been referred to as many different things. Originally, it was named after the guy whose, attic it was found in or something, but we've obviously changed that now because that was a really stupid thing to do. Today, this object has been referred to as the Shaman of Newark, and it's a really interesting piece. Now, I can't show you an actual image of the figurine because it is a burial good, and many of these burial goods have been sort of repatriated to the descendant groups of the people who created them, and they've deemed it not really appropriate to use photos of it. However, it's okay to show drawings and artist depictions, so that's what's here. But if you were to Google search it, you could find some images of it online, for those of you that are interested. The Shaman of Newark is absolutely beautiful. It depicts a seated figure wearing a bear skin holding a severed head in its lap. Now, this feels rather grisly, and originally, of course, the first thought was, it's a war trophy! Again, the propaganda. But you don't exactly have to be an empath to look at this figure and, kind of piece together that it doesn't really look like a warrior. It is more likely that this is a depiction of someone doing some sort of ceremony. It's known that some Hopewell burials would incorporate severed heads, not severed heads as a trophy, but in the same way that in, Christianity or Catholicism, there's relics of the saints. So, if you have, someone who did something great, you keep some of their remains. So this may have been the case for the Hopewell people who would, maybe keep the remains of ancestors, and they would later be interred with people later down the bloodline. Interestingly, this figure also is depicted with copper ear spools, of which there are actual artifacts found at different Hopewell sites, and are associated with some sort of ceremonial regalia. Now, as beautiful of an artifact as this is, I want to emphasize again that this is one of the only artifacts we have from this site. This entire complex was so rapidly and wantonly destroyed that most of what was there was lost. I know you've probably been thinking this whole time, Milo, that's a pretty cool poster. And you're right, it is a pretty cool poster. I'm a big map nerd, as you guys are probably aware. And as we were making this map, we kind of thought to ourselves, I bet, all of you guys, if you're anything like me, you're also probably really big map nerds. So we decided that we could make this available for anyone who wants this map. And of course, since that wasn't enough work, we decided to make not one, not two, but 3 maps available. We have this one, the artist's interpretation of the Great Circle Earthworks, as well as a map showing the astronomical alignments and sacred geometry of this site, which I'll talk about in the next video, and the magnum opus, a full infographic of everything you could ever want to know about the Hopewell Ceremonial Earthworks, including a bunch of information that I didn't have time to cram into this video. It took me almost as long to make this poster as it did to script the rest of this, so enjoy it, I guess. But if you're interested in those, you can check them out down in the description. You can get them in a pack, so you can get all 3 if you're interested. But if you're looking for something to spruce up the walls of your dorm room or your apartment, well, why not something made by a real, actual human artist? This video's been in production a very long time, as you can probably tell. I filmed this back in November. And one of the things I thought would be really cool to do would be to do miniature shots. So I made a whole little 3D printed miniature model of this. I made a 3D render of the site. Oh, wow, look at that. Pretty cool. I have to cover my face so it doesn't lock onto me. Now, my team and I had enough to do with this video, so we didn't have time to do miniature shots of this, but my wonderful editor, Kale, did use this data for the model, 3D model that we kind of used digitally to show you around this site. But if any of you guys are interested in using any of this 3D data or have a 3D printer yourself, I'm gonna have the OBJ file for this model over on my Patreon. It'll be available for the standard early access tier, and I'll probably also try and put it up as like a one-off thing, which I think you can do for anyone who's interested in it. But yeah, if you have 3D printing capabilities or are just interested in messing around with this model in a 3D program, enjoy it. It's yours to mess with. So can you give us a little bit of a perspective of what the timeline of this location was?
Well, the earliest people we know of are 13,000-year-old Paleo-Indians. We're getting an indication now from like White Sands in New Mexico that people were here much earlier than that.
Yeah.
But we simply don't have that evidence in Ohio.
While we don't have any evidence for pre-Clovis people at this particular site, we do have evidence of them at the Meadowcroft Rock Shelter in Pennsylvania, which is only about 160 miles away. And the oldest evidence there dates back to about 16,000 years.
And some of the artifacts found in those deep layers are Flint Ridge flint.
Which is the type of flint found at Flint Ridge, which is the very same flint used by the Hopewell builders.
Really?
So we know they came through Ohio.
How's that for flint? Through the end of the Ice Age, Paleo-Indigenous people would have been living as these very kind of small, hypermobile groups. They would have hunted big game, and they wouldn't have stayed in one place for all that long. But as the megafauna began to go extinct and the climate began to change, humans had to adapt to a new lifestyle. It's around here that archaeological evidence shows the ancient people beginning to expand their diet and live in slightly larger but still nomadic groups.
So that culture has a different name, and that's the Archaic culture. And that goes for like 6,000 to 7,000 years.
Then about 2,800 years ago, in the area that is now Ohio, the people living there discovered something revolutionary: agriculture. This massive lifestyle revolution harkened in what archaeologists refer to as the Woodland period.
And that may go back as far as 800 BC.
One of the largest cultures to arise in the Woodland period was the Adena.
And those are the direct ancestors of the Hopewell culture.
I see,
and they start building mounds, circular mounds.
That were sometimes burial structures, or they'd build small earthen enclosures which were used as community churches and worship centers.
And that's basically what community churches should look like for the Hopewell. But something happens, there's an explosion of art, ritual, and architecture, and the Hopewell culture is sort of right at the, I think, the golden moment in time, because they had the rich diet of the hunter-gatherers, hunting, fishing, and gathering. But then they also had the stability afforded by limited agriculture. They weren't growing corn, which is what most people think of about Native American plants. They were growing what's called the Eastern Agricultural Complex: goosefoot, lamb's quarter, knotweed, little barley, some other sort of starchy or oily seeds. And the two most familiar things would be squash and sunflower. But then
Sunflower, really?
Yeah, it was a domesticated plant here.
Wow.
It's one of only about 7 places in the world where local plants were domesticated. The Hopewell culture in general dates to between about AD 1, perhaps as early as AD or 100 BC, all the way up to AD 400. And I've made an argument that this is relatively late. We have a few radiocarbon dates from other components that seem to cluster around 300 AD, 300 CE. And I think that's plausible. I think all of the astronomy, the geometry, the architectural stuff was worked out by the people in Chillicothe. That's like the origin point of the Hopewell culture. I think most archaeologists agree. And I think people came here, some group of people came up here and built the grand synthesis of Hopewell architecture and religion. All these individual elements have corresponding earthworks in Chillicothe. Here they're brought together in this massive composition. The Newark earthworks originally encompassed more than 4.5 square miles.
Wow. So that's the scale we're looking at here? This is covering 4 miles?
Probably, maybe not across, but yeah, I mean 4 square miles.
4 square miles, wow.
A conservative estimate is that 7 million cubic feet of earth was used to construct it. And the technology that they used was as simple as you can imagine: pointed sticks, clamshell hose, and baskets. Is this something that was built? They wanted to build it now, and so they gathered 1,000 people and worked them every day for 6 months or something. Or was it just people would come here for particular festivals, for particular ceremonies, and participate in building in an episode, and then come back next year and add more? We just don't know.
The Hopewell would take what the Adena had started and bring it to the next level, and they created some of the largest earthworks and complexes of any one of the civilizations that built mounds. And they expanded their sphere of influence, with artifacts like conch shells from the Gulf of Mexico and obsidian from Yellowstone caldera all found in association with Hopewell sites.
It's connected to an area where there were many burial mounds, which links it by parallel walled roads directly to that ceremonial activity. Also, I think these places were pilgrimage centers. I think people were literally coming from the ends of their world to come here as pilgrims. The burial mounds at Newark were simply destroyed, but burial mounds in Chillicothe, ceremonial regalia is found in those mounds made from raw materials, special raw materials that come from the ends of the world.
Wow.
Conch shells from the Gulf of Mexico, copper from southern Canada, obsidian from Yellowstone Park.
Wow.
And these
my goodness.
The obsidian, they have these like giant spear points that are like this big, but they're made out of glass, so they're not really spear points. They're ceremonial offerings buried in the mounds either as funerary objects or sometimes in large deposits of just offerings of lots of ceremonial regalia at one time.
Wow, so we have evidence, extensive evidence, that the Hopewell people were at the center, or at least part of an enormous trade network then.
I don't think it's trade. I think they're bringing ceremonial offerings here. When I was an undergraduate, it was taught as if it were a trade network. But I think it's because nothing in Ohio really is going in the other direction, except maybe this spiritual message. We do find a little bit of the signature flint of the Hopewell, Flint Ridge Flint, which is quarried about 9 miles from here. And it comes in all the colors of the rainbow, so it's really distinctive. And the Hopewell quarried that flint on an industrial scale and made basically two kinds of artifacts, little sort of bladelets that are like replaceable razor blades and small little triangular bifaces. And we find a smattering of those around, not as far as Yellowstone certainly, not even as far probably as the Mississippi River, but I think those are given as pilgrims' tokens to people here.
A little souvenir that they get and then bring back home with them.
Yeah, and Ohio has an advertising slogan now that has revived an older one that I think is really appropriate. It says, "Ohio, the heart of it all."
Hey, Grandma, up for a road trip?
What do you say? Golf course is completely surrounded by Indian mounds.
The Ohio History Connection essentially wants to take back the property and not compensate us for the improvements that we've made to the Mound Builders Country Club.
Follow your heart at ohio.org. Ohio, the heart of it all.
2,000 years ago, this was the heart of an indigenous civilization that covered much of eastern North America, all the way to Yellowstone, all the way to the Gulf of Mexico.
We wouldn't say that the Hopewell were a people that existed in the Gulf of Mexico, that existed in Yellowstone and, northern Canada. So was this a place that multiple different cultures would have come? What was really the sort of cohesive nature of the Hopewell people?
Yeah, I think the cohesive nature had to do with their religious beliefs. It's sort of like a rough analogy would be like Catholicism. And so you've got Catholic churches in Mexico and Guatemala, you've got them in Spain, you've got them in Africa, and they all have their own local flavors, but they all have this sort of religious core. And I think that's the case with the Hopewell. There's people all over much of North America that are participating in this. And people were coming here speaking mutually unintelligible languages. But we know from early history that they had like a sign language, that on the plains and on much of eastern North America, people had a sign language, and it was like a trade language. And so they could communicate. Also, the Hopewell had this incredible ceremonial vocabulary. The regalia that they wore helped to identify them as maybe Bear Clan or whatever. And people coming here wearing that regalia, they'd be, you go over there.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, I mean, I'm imagining that because of this rich symbolic vocabulary that the Hopewell had, but the scale of the places, the artifacts that come from the ends of the world, I mean, why build these gigantic complexes unless you expect to fill them, particularly maybe at certain times of the year? I mean, like the church I grew up in, Christmas and Easter, the thing's full. Other times it's not so full. Sometimes there's just a couple families there on a Saturday for a wedding.
Yeah.
These places were probably like that. And with the octagon, we think here those key dates related to the cycles of the moon.
Interesting. what was sort of the first contact with European settlers in this area, and how did European colonization affect the once enormous scale of these earthworks?
The earliest account we know is from 1800, when a guy was like local pioneer living in a cabin further east, was like coming over here on his horse, hunting deer, and stumbled across it. And the story goes, he goes back and gets his wife, and they both come riding back, and he's like, what the heck? They're just, their minds are, being expanded. But very shortly after that, the city of Newark is founded on the other side of the river. It starts growing. It starts expanding this way. People start plowing the mounds down just because they want more cornfield. This is very fertile land. In 1848, Ephraim Squire and Edwin Davis, writing for the Smithsonian Institution, do the map here. They write that the ancient lines can now be traced only at intervals among gardens and outhouses.
Wow.
And they predict 50 years from now, the people that live here will have to look at our map to even know this was here.
Wow.
That did in fact happen in many places like Circleville. It does not happen here because the local community manages to save the Great Circle by making it the county fairgrounds, and the Circle and Octagon by making it the campgrounds for the National Guard. And they have different histories over time, but because of their intentional work to try to preserve these major elements, a big portion of this site, an important part, was saved. The burial mounds became an area of heavy industry. The Ohio Canal went through them, the Central Ohio Railroad went through them, and the railroad actually used the burial mounds as, oh look, a pile of dirt. We can use that to build the railroad embankment.
Oh my God, that's horrifying.
So that's why we have almost no knowledge of what came out of the burial mounds here at Newark.
Wow.
But we have the example in Chillicothe of those sites that tell us that the same things found there would have been found in these mounds.
This is known as Hull Circle. It's a rather large minor enclosure of this site. Despite being located at like ground zero for the destruction of this site, Hull Circle was saved because a guy named Eli Hull was like, that is a great spot to build a house. And so at some point in the 1800s, Eli built his stately home in the middle of the circle and incorporated the earthwork into the landscaping of the site. There's pictures of the house in the circle in some of like the old atlases from Licking County. Check it out, it's pretty neat. Now today, the land around Hull Circle has been subdivided beyond recognition. And except for maybe a few small fragments that survive in backyards, Hull Circle is pretty much entirely destroyed.
There are estimates that between 8,000 and 10,000 mounds were in Ohio. The Ohio Historic Preservation Office knows about 2,000, and many of those are historic records. The mounds no longer exist. They just have a record of them.
So it's not even 2,000 existing, it's 2,000 that are known of.
Yeah.
Wow, and how many would you say are still actually standing?
I mean, it's hard to say because some are on private land, and some private landowners protect them. But the ones that are on sort of state or federal land that are protected, it's a handful. I mean, a dozen, 20.
A dozen?
Yeah, it's a very small number.
Oh, that's so sad.
Archaeology is a tricky business. You're in a race against the clock and against those that want to develop these sites for progress. This is why it's important to teach and learn about these sites, because when stuff like this happens, it's completely irreplaceable. It happened then, and it's happening now. And as tragic as it is to think about what was lost, not only historically and archaeologically, but also culturally and just morally, I hope that it will at least give us a little bit of a motivation to, try and advocate against stuff like this happening in the future.
Like, I think it's easy to kind of hear about how much of this has been lost and just feel really defeated by it. What is the thing that kind of keeps that light alive for you, that makes you think that we can still learn a lot about this?
Well, the big thing that we just accomplished last year was getting these sites on the World Heritage List. Because we have people in the community that have no appreciation whatsoever of these. They'll drive by them and don't even know what they're looking at. And I've experienced that from some of my very earliest years here. I would go to school groups and talk to them, and I mean, they don't even know what's in their own backyard. And so one of my goals early on was to get these sites inscribed on the World Heritage List. They certainly deserved it. And then when these people, the people in Newark, see people from around the world coming to see these sites, they'll recognize that these sites are important and that they have something precious in their own backyards. And I think we have to do that all over the place so that people appreciate it.
Because we're so used to that more European architecture and archaeology made out of stone and things like that, how do you try and convey the significance of these sites despite the material that they're made out of?
There was an author of a book, I probably shouldn't mention it, in her last chapter. It's a book about archaeologists, and it's a wonderful book, and it's about how archaeologists are really great and do great stuff. But in the last chapter, she talks about a bus ride to Machu Picchu, and there's like an annoying woman in the back, who I know, who is going on about the Hopewell Earthworks and how they deserve to be a World Heritage Site. And this woman's going like, well, big deal. They're just piles of dirt. It's not like Machu Picchu. And because of reading that, the response I give people is, these mounds are piles of dirt in the same way that the Parthenon is a pile of rocks.
That does put it into perspective. Yeah.
Drop.
Yeah, boom. Wow. Brad, thank you so much for sharing this site with us today and for platforming your expertise. I really appreciate you sharing everything that you know about this site.
It's a pleasure. I'm very happy that you were able to be here and to be able to share all of this with your platform.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I guess to kind of end things off here, what would you have to say? I kind of always, whenever I'm working with someone on camera, I want to give the opportunity at the end to give them the place to say something that they feel like needs to be shared with a broad audience. Do you have anything that you feel like you would want to share with the world, be it about this site or something larger?
What I want people to come away with when they visit these sites are that these sites are not just, as some people have claimed, piles of dirt. They are magnificent earthworks using Mother Earth, the most sacred material available to Indigenous Americans, to create this monumental architecture. And I want people to be able to appreciate the grandeur of these sites and see them as the Indigenous people may have seen them.
Thank you very much, Brad. It's been a pleasure having you on today. I appreciate you sharing your expertise.
Thank you, my love.
The Hopewell Ceremonial Earthworks at Newark, Ohio are an unbelievably impressive site. I'm sure all of you have heard friends come back from vacations and be like, oh, you had to have been there. Pictures don't do it justice. And I'm gonna say exactly that to you right now. Pictures and videos do not do it justice. My team and I have tried our best to convey the scale of this site using overlays of modern roads that you guys have kind of a rough idea for how big they are. But there is really nothing like standing at the middle of the Great Circle and looking around and being like, oh my God, people built this with baskets? For anyone that lives remotely close to this area or is planning on driving through Ohio,
For a road trip?
I could not recommend coming to this site more. It is free, it's open to the public, it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and it is absolutely worth the visit, especially now that they're expanding over to the Octagon Earthworks as well, which I regrettably didn't have time to visit while I was there, so you'll actually get to see it before I do. Once that's actually incorporated into the site though, I think I'm gonna have to go back, because that's gonna be really cool. But if you do go, make sure to find some of the people that work at the site and chat them up. Brad, thank you so much for helping make this video. It was a pleasure to work with you, and it was truly an honor to have your expertise here. For those of you that do go to Great Circle, make sure to tell them that Milo sent you. Now, I don't really like splitting videos up into two parts, which is why I tried to make this one really just the whole thing about the Hopewell Ceremonial Earthworks at Newark. But I really do think that for this case, it is the best move to make a whole separate video just talking about the sacred geometry and astronomical alignments, because again, I've heard so many of these buzzwords used in so many pseudoscientific ways that I really want to capitalize on an opportunity to talk about a case where it is completely factual and scientific. If you're watching this at the live premiere, Sunday nights, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, it'll probably be out in like 2 weeks or something like that. But this video is going to be up on YouTube indefinitely, so chances are by the time you're watching this, it's already out. Check it out. If you're interested in checking out one of these posters or one of these other posters that I don't have here physically with me in person right now, so we're gonna just kind of show images of them popping up on the screen. The link to that is in the description of this video. By purchasing these posters, you not only help fund the free publicly available online education that we do here, but you also support actual real artists. Not a single AI was used in creating this poster, or this poster, or this poster. So a portion of each sale of these posters goes directly to the artists, so they are actually reaping the reward for their hard work. I'd like to thank you all very much for watching this video. It was a blast to make, a lot of work, but absolutely worth it. As always, remember to tip the bellhop on your way out. Likes, comments, subscriptions, and sharing this video with your friends. It's your way of gaming the capitalist algorithm to help me continue doing what I do here, and it doesn't cost you a cent. I'd also like to give a huge thank you to my patrons on Patreon who help make what I do here possible. Patrons get early ad-free access to all of my videos, as well as access to the model for this, so check that out if you're interested. Patrons also get their names in the credits of this video as a small token of my appreciation. Ladies and gentlemen, remember to stay curious, stay inquisitive, and most importantly, it's great big, you know? I got nothing. pick a funny clip from the video and stick it in there, I guess. You know, I feel like we've been doing more credit sequences where it's me just kind of standing here and talking. And I have a hunch that that's exactly what this is. Thanks for watching, guys. This was a fun one. A lot of work. There was definitely, I overcomplicated this one a little bit with all the posters and all of the 3D models and all of the animations, and I'd like to formally apologize to my team. Sorry, guys. So I appreciate all of y'all's patience and for, you know, contributing to the channel and just keeping the train moving forward, you know? Whenever I get really stressed out, you know, taking a really long time to produce a video, it is always just the best feeling when it finally has premiered and just seeing the overwhelming show of support and everything from my audience. I really cannot stress enough how grateful I am for all of you guys. It just means the world to me that you guys love what I do here, and it feels so gratifying to make something that people really love. It makes every hour, every reshoot, every, you know, extra week added on to a project absolutely worth it at the end of the day to make something that people love and are inspired by. Not to get freaking sappy in the outro. See, I caught it. This is a professional video. We don't do that naughty language here. All right, guys, did I get everything for my reshoot? Yeah, I think I got everything. Okay, well, that's the end of the video, guys. To dream the impossible.